Welcome to Transformation Heroes by Feedia, a series dedicated to CX professionals. Hello and welcome to another episode of Transformation Heroes. Transformation Heroes is a series dedicated to the individuals that are working in companies that want to transform and improve. We explore all sorts of challenges and ideas that allow you to feel empowered. Today, we are covering 6 traps to avoid when using AI for text analysis within the CX context. Today, once again, joined with François. Hello, François.
Hello, Carlos. Good to be back.
Wonderful. All right, let's jump in. So as I mentioned, we have 6 different traps that we want to uncover and hopefully tackle. So trap number 1 is when using AI to understand text analysis, we often have a very blinded view of reality. So what I mean by that is often when we use tools, we are looking at one source and one source only within the customer journey. And François, I'd like you maybe just to expand on that a little bit in terms of your experience.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. And I think that's a key topic of the last episode as well, is it's very dangerous to make assumptions and to make decisions if you only have a blinded view of your actual customer experience. And there are actually quite a few channels that you want to keep in mind, that you want to keep in the system. And for example, if you're using AI to detect improvement plans in the customer journey, but you're only listening to a ticket system, well, like you basically only hear what's wrong when people take the time to actually, write a ticket and that ticket is resolved. And that can be quite dangerous because again, then you're making decisions without the full context. And so you want to make sure that when it comes to text analysis, you have a global view of every single interaction that's possible with your company throughout your customer experience. And there are actually 4 that we see a lot in text analysis, and they're very easy to centralize. The first one's going to be e-reputation. So anything that comes, from a Google review, Trustpilot, or specific stores, that's very interesting. You have lots of feedback in there. You also want to have access to your surveys data, obviously. But then there's 2 more. There's the tickets data, very interesting. So again, could be Zendesk, could be any system that's where you have an issue and you're going to report it to the company. You want this to be centralized. And then the 4th one is going to be about social networks. Again, could be your Instagram, could be any single page that you have. You want to make sure that when you use AI to analyze all of this, you don't have one source or worst, one survey or one part of the reputation. You want to get as much as possible a global view, because then the level of text available is going to be a key differentiator and key, it's going to be very impactful in the way you're going to make decisions based on these insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that's really interesting as well is the defocus from just one point of a customer journey. Yeah. I remember you mentioning in a previous episode about an internet provider and the engineer coming over and essentially being you can only get internet if you give me 5 stars. And obviously that's a very specific point of the journey and also a very biased point of the journey. So, if your whole company was based on the engineer installation and that's it, you might be seeing something that's not actually accurate to...
Yeah, and it doesn't represent reality, right?
Exactly.
But from your, again, from where you look at, you could be that's the data and that's what I'm saying. But again, if you make decisions based on 15% of the information, that's very dangerous. And also you're missing most of the key insights. So that's why we believe it's a very good opportunity, because again, whether that's social networks, tickets, surveys data, reputation, this data is already there. And it already, whether you like it or not, your customers are going to generate that information. So yeah, pretty straightforward to capture it.
Talk me through some of the challenges of centralization, because I know we've talked about just now, we know the need of putting all these sources in one place. For a general business, however, that sounds potentially quite overwhelming. So maybe talk to me through some common issues that happen and how we can maybe overcome them.
Yeah, so first of all, you want to map them. So you want to know at every single piece of the customer journey, where is the interaction or where the feedback can come from. Again, sometimes comes from survey inside the product. Sometimes, the example you've just mentioned with the internet provider, where you're going to send a survey by email. This is another touch point. But again, me writing an email to my internet provider is also another touch point where I'm going to send useful information for them to improve, right? Yeah. It's just that they didn't necessarily ask me to get my point of view, but I'm going to give it through support system. So the first one is you want to be able to map them. The second one is you want to make sure like the ease of integration just depends on whether you have up-to-date systems, which have like APIs. So for example, if you're using Salesforce, like very, very simple to connect. If you're using like Google reviews, very, very simple. If you use your built-in CRM system or your custom-made ticket system, that can be actually, as you mentioned, that can be very complex. And then there's not really like that much workaround except like, like developing your own sets of APIs. But if you're using any of the major providers in terms of reviews, tickets, service data, like they all have APIs, and therefore the centralization is basically just pushing a button to get the data in.
Now, I think, the reliance on having one source is something that we need to move away from. So I'd like to challenge a little bit further in terms of how we can get these channels speaking together, because one thing that can also happen is you might be getting lots of insights off the different channels, because as you mentioned, we're measuring reputation, we're measuring socials, we're measuring ticket data. All of them might be telling you different things. So how would you, from your point of view, unify this information in order to not have scattered actions?
Yeah, so first of all, again, if you've done the mapping correctly, like that means for every source, you have a couple of metadata which are very important and very, like more than important, actually, like you cannot really do without them. So for example, for a ticket, you're going to get the customer email address, which you can map with your CRM data, and then you get the full context, right? So you want to find as much context as possible, because the context is the one that's going to help you go through all of this data and identify very precise action. And again, we're talking about AI today in the context of text analysis. That's where it's very, very valuable, because like that amount of data is very easy for an AI today to process, and also like to give you very clear insights that are based on these channels, but they can cut through the noise based on your own context. And I think that's one of the key points is it's okay to have a lot of text data, which is not necessarily very much organized, because the AI can do the job for you.
And I think that leads very swiftly, very smoothly into trap number 2, which is the AI can have very generic insights.
Yeah.
And I know you've mentioned context. I'd love for you to expand on that already, because I think what often can happen is we take AI at its current state as the be all and end all, just like we did with Google at the beginning when it first came out, with the Ask Jeeves revolution, etc. And I think there is still a need to have some human eyes to be able to specify exactly what's needed, what type of actions are needed. So I wondered if you can maybe not debunk, but challenge the issue of AI creating generic insights.
Yeah. So if you do the exercise, so you need a ChatGPT team account, so your data is not used for training. But if you were to dump like one of the channels, so for example, some reputation data, some tickets data, or some survey data, and you would ask like improvement plans, like metrics on, like what's broken, like it would work, but it wouldn't be that actionable, because most of the insights that are going to come out of this are going to be pretty generic. Like they are like, do the exercise, you'll see it's going to be pretty generic. And there are like 2 ways to solve this. The first one is you want to provide context from a business standpoint. So based on, like what you want as a user, but also what your business does. Because if you compare to ChatGPT doesn't really know until you tell him what your business is all about, right? So if you're an internet provider, like the improvements based on your reputations are going to be completely different than if you sell software, right? Like it's 2 different. And so you want to provide that context in terms of the organization, the industry. That's very important. You also want to provide context in terms of the, what you want as a user. So again, if we take the beauty of customer experience and what we do in terms of customer intelligence, that it approaches, like a lot of different part of the organization. Could be quality, could be marketing, could be customer experience, could be product development. But these individuals also, they want to transform, they want to improve, but they have very different responsibilities, right, in this organization. So if you are, for example, on the product side, like you want your AI analysis to digest for you only the insights where you can actually have an impact, right? Which are going to concern the product itself, which are going to, if we take again the example of the internet provider, like you want feedback on the box, you want feedback on the application, but you don't really care whether the guy was late or not to to install the box. Like that is outside of your scope of responsibility. And so this ability to have context on what the organization does, but also what you do as an individual, helps you get much better insight, simply because it's going to be tailored to your use case as an individual. And then the second part, so when you remove like the context of the organization and the context of the individual, you want to make sure that you have the the data context. So again, I give you a review. Can you tell me like if these customers exist in my CRM and if I can find what type of package he picked and when he signed up with us? You also want information about like who is in charge of this account. Like this metadata, which usually is in some kind of CRM system, you want it to also provide context to the AI, because if you don't have this, it's also going to be quite generic. But if you have the organization context plus the data context from the customer experience, well, then the insights are going to be like you're not going to have like 5 recommendations, but you're going to have 5 recommendations per type of role, per type of product, per type of customer, and then that's going to be a lot more actionable.
It sounds like it's all about structuring. It's not about just, putting it into a model and being like, all right,
Yeah, but the good news is, again, like technology can do that for you, right? Like as long as you have systems which have APIs, as long as you are looking to improve, like most of what we're discussing today can be done with technology. Again, like that's what we do at Feeder, so we know it's possible. But if you take the ChatGPT analogy, where you'd be like, okay, I'm going to have the same result, like you would have to take all of your data, you would have to make sure that the connected users knows exactly the kind of insights he's looking for, and then you would have to do this on a regular basis. But that's why it's not this straightforward. But technically speaking, like in 2024, as we record this episode, like this is very much doable in most organizations.
Okay. Right. Trap number 3. Trap number 3 is all about relying on old models. So natural language processing, it's been about for quite some time now. Whether the lack of using large language models or the most recent large language models can create a bit of industry delay, I would say. I know there's talk of BERT, for example, B-E-R-T. Yep. I wondered if you can maybe talk about your experience in this section.
Yeah, it's an excellent podcast, and we've touched a little bit on that in the last episodes as well. But basically, if you look at the history of AI in the field of customer experience, and again, like understanding what's going on, making actions plans to improve, like natural language processing has been there for a while, because it was one of the first use cases that actually made it to production. 2 use cases or 3 use cases that were the most common were like, okay, I'm going to give you a text. Can you give me a sentiment? And this, you could do it like from the last 10 years on AWS, or like there are a bunch of services that do that for a long time, that have been doing that for a long time. And then you have like, for example, entity detection. So I'm able, when I give you a text, you can identify if it's mentioning a product or a city or a person, right? And then I'm going to give you a set of topics, and you're going to give me if they match or not with the text I've provided. But the key technical limitation with these kind of models, which have been there for a long time, but used a lot in the last 5-6 years, I would say, is they are very generic. Like because like they don't rely on your context, they don't rely on your data. So the topics you can use are going to be very generic. Is this feedback discussing politics? Is this feedback discussing a bug? But when you want to enter very precise details on your organization, so again, looking back at the internet provider, like if you were to have a model that would detect for you internet quality, like no generic model would have done that for you. So you would have to train your model. That's very expensive. And that's where the beauty of LLMs comes in, right? Is because basically you can get all of this without investing into fine-tuning and by using existing data. And that's why like one of the traps is to still rely on systems that didn't make the move in terms of AI capabilities, and that are not using the full context, that are not using the full data sets available. And this can lead to quite, again, like misleading insight, because you're going to get very generic topics, maybe very good, but very, like the matching is going to be good, but the topics themselves, they're not going to be tied to your own problem, tied to your own industry.
Yeah, they're not actionable. I mean, I remember seeing really generic things, just even like positive and negative. Yes, it's great that we have that, but how can I take action? How am I able to group these certain text answers together to be like, okay, well, the underlying topic is actually X or Y.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like context is key. When it comes to sizes, if you don't get context, like again, you cannot do much. Like you're going to get very generic things. You're going to be like, yeah, I have an AI system, I'm doing AI in my company, but at the end of the day, you are not able to put that into actionable business outcome.
Okay. I know you touched on this a little bit, but just to expand a little bit further, in terms of how businesses or even CX teams, how are they able to keep up to date with the systems or the integrations that are leading the way in terms of AI improvements?
Yeah. So if you look at everything that happened right now, if you open LinkedIn or Twitter, X, sorry, like you have AI updates like on a weekly basis at bare minimum. You got new models, you got AI companies raising like hundreds of millions every single week. So it's very hard to keep up. It's very hard for everyone. You do have some leaderboards of models. So for example, Hugging Face, which is kind of like a repository of all the AI models. Like they keep a leadership board where you can see the performance of every single level in terms of reasoning, in terms of performance as well. Because the key difference between what we used to have before, so the BERT models, as you've pointed out, Carlos, is they were very efficient because they were pre-trained, so very generic, but very efficient. LLMs, as you have reasoning behind, it takes a little bit longer. So you cannot really, like, you may have some delay between the moment that you add the information that enters your system and the moment you have the actionable output. But that's part of where we are right now in terms of technology. So you do have leaderboards, but also at the end of the day, it's not something, if you want to scale it in your organization, that's not something you want to do by yourself. You want to rely on a partner. That partner could be a consulting firm, could be a software firm, right? And for example, if we take the figure use case, like this is our job in regards to our clients to make sure that we always use the best model for them. And as we pay the cost of these models as well, like it's also in our best interest, right? To make sure that because these models over time, the cost of compute is going down and the cost of intelligence is also going down with AI. And so, like using the last model is very, very important because you're always ahead of the competition, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a lot about working with a partner that isn't stagnating, essentially. Working with a partner that's always looking to grow, that's always looking to, to have your best interests in mind as well as growing the business. Great. Okay, so trap number four. Trap number four is all about the manual work behind this process. I've worked with a lot of teams that have a lot of data that they need to upload, and that can be quite a daunting task. So maybe talk to me how we can streamline that process of having lots of data to upload in order to not fall into the trap of I have thousands of millions of feedback that I need to analyze.
Yeah, and that's why like you want to go full automation on this, and you want to have a system that can go into full automation as we discussed at the beginning of this episode, right? Because a lot of the customers or the users that we see today, more in the sales process, is like they're using AI for text analysis and they're using like stuff like ChatGPT, like Anthropic models. But the way they do it is they basically drop the files, right? And they drop the file to the system and they're like, okay, well, give me the insights. But as we discussed before, like the problem with this is you do not choose all the data available. You do not provide the right context because every single time you drop the file, you don't say the kind of industry you're in, you don't have any access to CRM data as well, then yeah, you might not use even the best model, right? So all of this make the manual work of using AI very dangerous because it is like you're going to rely on most of the times on outdated information because again, like if you do it manually, it's going to take some of your time. CX people, again, they don't have to get the CX job title, but people that are looking to transform and improve, like they have plenty to do. They are overreached by everyone in the company. So, like they are going to miss some of this analysis. And therefore, at the end of the day, when they do it, they're going to have past data only, which is pretty old, could be like a couple of weeks old, could be a couple of days old. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be the most up to date. And also, they're missing part of the information. So the results are not very that actionable, right?
Yeah, it sounds to me as well that they're open to maybe individual bias because as the user themselves, they might have, 10 years, 5 years experience, whatever, working with certain teams. They have their own point of view.
Yeah, that's the next second point. Yeah, definitely.
That could potentially influence the AI modeling because, if you're not having a clear context that is used at all times for all measurements, you could change it. You can be like, actually, let me focus more on the toilets being out of service, for example, because that could be my particular bugbear. I hate when toilets are shut. And so,
no, exactly. And again, that's why, like, when it comes to AI and text analysis, like the most out of the loop are humans, the better. And when you think about it, like, it makes sense. Like, if you're a human, I think we all are humans. But the point is try to analyze like 500 or 1,000 like text feedback. Like we're not very good at this because first of all, it's very manual. It's a daunting task as well. Like it takes like lots of process from our brain, takes lots of time. And at the end of the day, if you do this with AI, it does a much better job, much faster. So let's delegate this and let's focus on, like, how do we actually improve and how do you, like, use your hands, use our voice, like, to actually communicate with other teams the pain point that have been detected. So at the end of the day, like, the most manual work we remove out of this process, the better it is for everyone, simply because, again, like, we're not very good at this, but the AI is doing a much better job. It can use a lot more data than we currently can do, like that our brain can process. So that does make sense.
Okay. All right, moving swiftly on to trap number 5. Trap number 5 is keeping static text analysis models. So just to expand on that a little bit, often businesses might have a key focus, after the yearly review, the C-suite have decided that we are focusing on improving revenue, whatever it is. And so all the analysis data is aimed at that one particular target. And, 3 months, 6 months later, maybe that's improved. And maybe there's a new improvement that needs to be done. But 3 years down the line, we're still focusing on that same target.
Yep.
So could you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that like, the way you use AI is not static over time. It does evolve. As you mentioned, there's the evolvement of the goal of the system itself. So are we still, like, measuring and analyzing for the right goals? So again, like, if you reach an excellent NPS or an excellent satisfaction score, like, you might have different goals, and the way you configure the system can be completely different than if you were to, like, again, have lots of promoters losing lots of customers every single month. And the thing is, this hopefully evolve over time, right? So you want to make sure that the goals are always up to date, and therefore they're easy to configure. Because when you say to the AI, like, hey, I want to focus on this, like, you want to make sure that this system doesn't end up, like, fixed, like custom code. You can't touch it or it costs you lots of money. Like, you want to make sure that you can adapt it. And then you also want to make sure that the information that are fed into the system is also up to date as much as possible. Because if you were to analyze, like, the past 2 years of information, one shot, that is a lot less actionable than if you were to analyze it 3 times the last 3 months, like 3 months ago, 2 months ago, 1 month ago, because then you can detect with up-to-date data, again, ticket systems, survey systems, social networks, like any source of feedback, interaction, feedback signals. Like, you want to make sure that you get the most up-to-date information, and that if you do this well, then it's a very big competitive advantage, because if your customers are not doing it, you can detect trends before your competitors can detect them. And you can also make sure that the information and the feedback loop that you have inside your company is at a pace that is great. Like, that is not, hey, we had an issue, but we've been having this issue for 6 months and we're detecting it now simply because we're using data from, like, last year, or we listen to our customers on a yearly basis so we can improve one shot, like, one time per year. So that's why the more the more regular this kind of analysis are going to be in the future, the more impact you can get and the more velocity you can create inside your organization.
What advice would you give to a CX team? Imagine if I'm a member of CX team and I want to revamp my goals because I'm working for a business where the targets haven't really changed and I'm seeing a shift in what's needed, what's important. What sort of advice would you give in order to make that impact, in order to be able to change the business outcomes?
Yeah, so you want to use AI with your existing information, make sure it's up to date, and then you want to use AI in text analysis to detect what's coming. So basically asking the system to detect, what are the most important topics, for example, what are the most important improvements suggested by clients. And then you want to have a way to quantify all of them. One way or another, it can be quantified by volume. It can be quantified based on the satisfaction score. So, for example, if you have net promoter score surveys, like, you have the text feedback, but you also have the NPS. And therefore, you can focus just on detractors. You can focus just on promoters. So you want to make sure that you have up-to-date information that is not coming from you, but that is coming from the system. And then you want to make sure that you can correlate that information with, okay, what is the impact inside? Because if you do this, well, then you can challenge your assumptions to be like, okay, well, we thought that if we look back at our good old internet provider example, like, we thought the most important issue was the box. But actually, when we listen to what our customers are saying and we use AI to analyze, like, everything they're saying throughout all our channels, like, we can see that the mobile application has 3x more detractors and 3x more mention. And on the login page, at the very beginning of the journey, we can see that the impact is 3x larger than the one mentioning the box, And so again, you can hear it because your support people, they will tell you, hey, we have an issue with the app. But the thing is, if you do it on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, like you are a couple of steps ahead of everyone because you can detect what's not working, you can detect what's working before the cost of inaction is too great that you have to hear about it from many different channels. And then it's not that it's too late, but you have built a depth of inaction, which you can solve today with technology, aka AI.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a price involved as well in waiting that long. It could be a cost of revenue, increase in churn. Yeah. Okay, moving on to our final trap. Trap number 6 is not having the right KPIs to measure business impacts. So we talked about this a little bit in our last point about being able to measure based on clear signals, based on, for example, NPS, looking at your detractors, your passives. What are the potential dangers of not using KPIs from
so your AI can be wrong. So that's one of the traps. So I think everyone has heard about like hallucination, which you can protect yourself if you just limit the scope of AI to the data that you provide. So that will remove any kind of hallucination. But however, you are still going to have sometimes the AI is going to be wrong in tagging a specific topic, into detecting a trend that's, like it's noise because, again, you take the internet provider, if they have a third party which they have no control over, like for you, if you work in that internet provider's, like customer experience team, well, that's not very insightful. I mean, again, you can point it out to the contract with the provider, but that's not something where you have actual, like it's not actionable at your level. So you want to make sure that you have metrics that will give you whether the system is accurate or not. And one way to measure this is to have a feedback system, like a feedback system inside a feedback system that will tell you for every single improvements or every single tagging, like you can basically upvote or downvote, and they will tell you like based on the last 500, like 1,000 tagging, like, like 5 were wrong. And therefore they will give you like based on this and the total number of tagging, you can calculate automatically what's the rate, what's the accuracy, right, that you're getting from the system. And you can make sure that this number goes up as well. Because at the end of the day, if everything we've just discussed so far today, like if the system is accurate up to like 40%, like you can have as many sources as possible. You can have as much context as possible. If at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense and it's wrong, like, well, like you can do much about it, right? Like you have no return on investment whatsoever.
Exactly, and you might be following yourself down a dead end where it's not actionable results, or the actionable result it's so minor that it doesn't make a business impact.
Yeah, and that's again like that's one of the key challenge of the next couple of months and the next couple of years. And then there is a second one, Carlos, which is not on the like AI accuracy, but more on the business outcome as well. Like you want to track based on the trends, based on the topics that were detected, like what is the business outcome. And one way to calculate this, it's always going to depend based on the business, right? But you can simply multiply the volume for a specific topic, for a specific improvement plan, for a specific like pain point that was detected. Like you can quantify that volume very easily. And then you want to just multiply it either by the cost of churn, if you have this, the cost of acquisition, or simply the lifetime value of the customer. But you want to correlate that to have a dollar value at the end of the day and to be like, okay, well, I've analyzed this month, like these 12 different sources, I've detected like 12 trends. And based on these 12 trends and these 12 pain points which are related to them, I'm able to order them based on the business outcome. And then that's very, like if you do this very well, then it's very easy to, I mean, it's not very easy, depending on the size of your business, but it's easier to make changes and to improve when you can say, well, hey, we have this issue with our internet box. Like, again, we are missing this input, which has been mentioned like 500 times like last month, which correlates to this amount of revenue, right?
And I think what's really interesting is this whole topic is talking about text analysis, but traditionally when you ask a survey, when you are measuring results, you also have some sort of rating. Like if it's a Google review, it's not just a text, it's also the rating behind it. So incorporating things like CSAT, like NPS, and as you mentioned, customer retention, customer lifetime value, those statistics alongside your text analysis is what really gives that power to say, okay, well, we are seeing clear results, we're seeing clear issues or clear improvements. And I think that's what makes ultimately the AI modeling that we're seeing today so impactful.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, if you look back to the first trap that we've mentioned, like if you connect it to your CRM, you have access to the dollar value at the end of the day. So you can know exactly you as a CX professional. And again, you could be working on products, doesn't matter, or in quality, you can trace it back to what's the revenue impacted by this. And this is very powerful because then you can link existing data using AI to save like a lot of time throughout the process, and then making sure that you can drive, again, business output, but also by keeping the customers at the very center of this improvements, because everything we've discussed is based on the customer, right? Because the source data is what is the customer inputs.
Okay, so if I were to summarize, the first area to tackle is using multiple sources. So using, reputation measurements, surveys, tickets, social media in order to get a centralized area of information. The second one is using context. So using in-house data and inputting as well organizational data into the AI models. The third one is not relying on old, outdated systems, but using most up-to-date and working with partners that are looking to grow, looking to improve, and not stagnating. Also, just reducing that manual work process by being flexible, by having clear goals, and being sure enough to adapt your goals when needed. So not just having a rigid goal that's set, but looking at the text information, looking at your KPIs, being able to say, okay, we need to now shift attention to this particular area. I think that's everything I have. Is there anything else that you would like to cover that I've missed?
No, makes perfect sense. Thank you, Carlos. Good
Lovely.
talk.
Thanks, Francois. As
Bye-bye.
always, time. See you in the next one.